Dear scholars, ladies and gentlemen, good day. My name is Mingda. I am a retired professor from Jinan University of China. I used to work in the Department of History. I have been a researcher and a fan of martial art. Today, it is my great honor to be here and I speak with you some of my personal thoughts on martial art, some of my personal opinions. To be honest, I haven't prepared any PowerPoint presentation, but rather I'm going to talk about how I think about martial art. And please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. The Chinese culture is a result of exchanges. Without exchanges, there wouldn't have been so long-lasting and enriched Chinese civilization. As we all know that exchanges are a driver of historical evolvement, the Chinese culture fully proves that we need exchanges in our evolvement. Exchanges involve a lot of complexity because of different reasons, for example, geographical reasons, historical background reasons, or even natural disaster reasons. All those reasons have made exchanges developed into different forms. And exchanges have not been conducted in a unified way. Sometimes there are more exchanges and sometimes there are less exchanges. However, exchanges have never been ceased in our history. And this is a fact. If you look at Chinese culture, if it was a good time in terms of production, economy, and civilization, if it is a good time, usually there were more exchanges. And benefiting from such exchanges, our society grew well. However, if there were difficulties in exchanges, while exchanges could not be done smoothly, and then you can see there will be a slowing down in our economy, in our cultural development. In my opinion, exchanges sometimes are conducted in a smoother way and sometimes in a more fierce way. For example, in the form of confrontation. So, very often, people do not pay a lot of attention to the exchanges in the form of confrontations. Confrontations between peoples, between tribes, between nations, and even internally between different regions in a country. We have different regions, we have different tribes, we have different cultures internally. There can be confrontations as well. And such confrontations may produce different results to our culture. And such results have their own features. So therefore, we can say that, for example, in terms of military confrontations, they are also exchanges. So military confrontations are also a format of cultural exchanges. Such exchanges may not be researched deep enough by researchers. Personally, I think so. Very often we talk about the Silk Road, the trading activities, so those positive exchanges. The Silk Roads on the land, through the maritime, some peaceful and friendly exchanges with our partners, with our neighboring nations, and such cultural exchanges. However, we do not pay enough attention to those negative exchanges, some confrontations between nations and between peoples. As a matter of fact, exchanges should include those military confrontations, specifically wars and battles, some military, sometimes very fierce and massive military exchanges. Usually, when we talk about such confrontations, it involved weapons, the military strategies. In China, before the Han and the Tang dynasties, we had exchanges with neighboring nations and cultures. And one of the examples is that during the war state period, Zhao Wulin Wang learned from the barbarian tribes on how to ride horses and how to shoot arrows in a battle. Riding horses, shooting arrows, so need different apparels. Therefore, the Han people during the Zhao period changed their apparels in order to ride a horse and shoot arrows. From the ancient time to the Middle Ages, in a very long period of time, in China, there was a very stable situation in our society, and there were less confrontations with neighboring nations or tribes. Chinese people love peace. Chinese people love stable and peaceful life. So, therefore, for a very long period of time, defense had been more important than offense. One good example is the Great War, and which is regarded as one of the miracles for the human beings. The Great War is a line of defense, is a line of safety. We are not offenders, but rather we are defenders. During the Middle Age period, we defended a lot from the tribes. Even though there were exchanges with others, we also had a lot of battles in the form of wars and battles, military confrontations. From the ancient time till now, when we talk about culture, we actually talk about two aspects, civil level and the martial level, two levels of a culture. When we talk about martial level, it involves weapons and art. By weapons, we talk about how to make weapons for defensive purpose, for attack purpose, how to design a weapon, how to make a weapon, and how to allocate such weapons to soldiers. And for each piece of a weapon, it has its own purpose, it has its own ways of usage, and it can also work together with other weapons together. And associating with the weapons, we develop a culture, and we call it art. This art is about how to use the weapon, what is the means of usage of such weapon, how to maximize such weapons in a battle. So we call it art. Making weapons, maintaining and repairing weapons, reserving weapons, and the heritage of such weapons, so on and so forth, as well as the skills of using the weapons. All those are included into this art, which is a very important part in our martial art in China. Such art involves and began to grow into one important part into Chinese culture. So there you can see exchanges is also evolving, and it involves exchanges on the weapons as well as on its art. Talking about the spreading of such martial art, it can be spread between peoples, it can be spread through literatures and languages and so on and so forth. You can see there have been a lot of literatures on such exchange of martial arts between different countries, different peoples. So, for example, our Chinese opera, you can see there are weapons there, and there are wars and description of wars and different scenarios of battles, and the languages, and, for example, different literatures, as well as fairy tales and stories. So these three types of exchanges on martial art has been integrated into a all-around system on martial art. This system is comprised of the hardware part, which is weapon, as well as the software part, which is the art. So till the Qing Dynasty, Han Dynasty, we began to evolve this system. We keep learning from other countries, other nations on martial art. It's not that we think of some idea, we build a weapon, and then we use it, and then it become a part of our martial art. But rather, it involves a lot of learning from foreign countries, from tribes. For example, what material they choose, what is the skill in their production, and how to use those weapons. So, from the ancient time, we had started exchanging with others on martial art. It's a pity that we haven't done a very good job in terms of such research. Ever since the Qing Dynasty, the nation, the highest level of a nation, has been controlling on such exchanges. Such exchanges, for example, how to make a weapon, is only allowed to be done at the nation level. An ordinary person is not allowed to learn how to make a weapon, and some weapons are strictly limited to the military force only. Ordinary people are not allowed to access such weapons. So, to some extent, this has prohibited the exchanges between peoples and between nations. As we all know that during the Tang Dynasty, the Arabian Empire began to rise. We had the Tang Empire. We had a lot of battles with other countries. For example, the West Asian countries and the Arabian countries. There were confrontations, battles, and even wars. For example, Temple's War was a very famous war. It was a war between nations. For the Arabian people, for the Chinese people, they came with very big impact. However, in our literacy, we can hardly find any specific description on the weapons, on the exchanges. And now we begin to understanding more and more of such history, along with the development of archaeology. To be honest, we do appreciate some highlights from the Western cultures. For example, the old Roman Empire, the European civilization. At the core of the European civilization, there sat Italy. And between China and Italy, in the ancient time, we had a lot of exchanges. During the Han Dynasty, and before that, it was the Qing Dynasty, we had exchanges with West Roman Empire. Exchanges on commodities such as tea, milk, so on and so forth. And no doubt, we had exchanges on military, on martial art as well. And these exchanges extended to the latter part of the Middle Age period, where in China we began to witness a huge transformation in our society. We all know that the Mongolians conquered a major part of Europe, and China began to be a very, very big country. At that time, it is the Yuan dynasty in China. At that time, we had a lot of foreign visitors to China. And you may remember very well an Italian person. It's Marco Polo. Marco Polo wrote down what he saw and what he met, what he experienced in China. And later, after Marco Polo, and before the Renaissance period, and even during the Renaissance period, a lot of Italian people came to China. Basically, they were Jesuits. They came to China to explore the Oriental culture. Along with them, they brought exchanges to China, which helped a lot in promoting Western culture to China. For example, the visits of Matteo Ricci, another Italian person. His visit has been one of the milestones in our history. So Matteo Ricci began to understand the Chinese civilization. Even though he was a religious person, however, he had a very good worldly understanding on our culture. He began to observe China's history, our literature, our culture, and our civilization. At a similar period of time, there was another foreigner, which is a very famous Spanish scholar, Mingda. He also wrote down what he knew about Chinese culture, Chinese history. He wrote a book. Actually, it is the first book written by a Western person on China. It's on Chinese history. The book was not published in Spain, but rather in Rome, in Italy. He got a very big impact, or very big influence to the Italian culture. The Mingda, Ricci, and after Matteo Ricci, there's another important Western person, a German. It's Johann Adam Shaw von Bell, so on and so forth. Such figures are very good examples. They came to China, they began to understand China, and they saw China from a different perspective, just as the way we look at foreign cultures. Because we were at different stages of economic growth in China and in Italy. A lot of researchers, a lot of scholars in China may have a very good memory that in the literatures there were descriptions on the China's military forces at that time. During the Ming Dynasty, the huge force was huge. The military force was huge. The country was big and very affluent. But in the north part of China, there was a very big crisis from the barbarian people. So in the military side, how to make weapons, how to train the military, how to train the soldiers, in China, actually, it was a bit backward than the European countries. And they foresaw that the Ming Dynasty was not an equivalent competitor to the northern barbarian tribes. Chinese people at that time did not have the courage to understand ourselves well, but from a foreign observer's point of view, they understood it very well. The weapons we used were not strong enough, and sometimes they were not real weapons. And when they practiced martial art, it was more like art, a performance, rather than real kung fu or real strength for them to win a battle. So they observed all those, and they wrote down in their literacy. And so I can say that they had a better understanding of our military force at that time than the Chinese scholars. They also understood that Chinese people are a peace-loving people, and they had very good, in-depth conversations with scholars in China at that time. However, they also understood that China appeared to be strong, but actually very weak. in their books, they wrote down very carefully that China could not ride horses very well. A lot of the horses that used in the military forces were actually castrated. The military horses were not trained very well, and a lot of horses were not ironed very well. You can't imagine that at that time the horses were not ironed at all. So that's why the Ming dynasty was conquered by the barbarians easily, even though they didn't have a strong riding force as the Ming dynasty had. The Qing riders had better horses, and all the horses were ironed, and they were trained better, but the Qing military force could not do it. So this is one important observation by the Westerners. But in our own literature written by the Chinese scholars, you can't find any sign of that. There's no trace about this. So thanks to the Italian scholars at that time, they began to understand China, they began to observe China from their own perspective. So because of this perspective, they understood that there was a gap. There was a gap between what China appeared to be and what China was, indeed. So Qi Jiguang is one of the heroes in China in our history. He fought fiercely with the barbarian tribes. However, he was able to access some Western technologies, and at that time there came the firearms. And you can see from the weapons we developed in China by ourselves, there was references of such impacts from the Western culture. The firearms, the knives and swords, how to allocate those fire weapons to the soldiers, as well as the formation of different troops. There were influences from Western culture, and those were the results of exchanges. It's a pity that we didn't study in depth enough on such exchanges. After the invasion, as we all know that China was invaded, and from the Han dynasty to the Ming and the Qing dynasty, the military force began to focus its goal on defending controlling the ruling party. Johann Adam Shaw von Bell lived in China for many years, and he was put into prison for some time, but later he was pardoned by the emperor at that time. Johann Adam Shaw von Bell was a very important figure, is a remarkable figure. He produced a lot of literacies, excellent literacies on China's history. And we still keep a lot of letters from him that he wrote to the Roman Empire, to the Roman emperor. From his letters, you can see how he observed on China's military troops, on our military forces, on our allocations of our weapons, what weapons we used, and even the making of such weapons. He saw what the Western countries were good at. He also saw what China was weak at that time. At the end of the Ming dynasty, there was a remarkable scholar, which is called Wang Bo. Later, he surrendered to the Qing dynasty. He wrote a letter to Rohan Adam Shaw von Bell. So this letter was written by Wang Do, and he called Johann Adam Shaw his Chinese name, which is Tang Ro Wang. You can see between Johann Adam Shaw and Wang Do, there was in-depth exchanges between them. And he heard a lot about China from Johann Adam Shaw von Bell, which he could not hear anything about from his colleagues, his peers. So by taking advantage of this conference, I have talked about some of my thoughts on martial art. This is the third session of our conference, and I'm very glad to see that we have a lot of foreign friends joining this conference. And we will definitely work together to promote the construction of a martial art as a subject. So we have a subject which is called the history of Sino-foreign history. So we look at our history from the trading perspective, from a foreign affair point of view, from a cultural exchange perspective. So during the culture exchange, martial art is a very important part on it, including the weapons, the arts, so on and so forth. So we understand that we haven't done a good job in researching in this aspect. This is my second time to speak at this conference. Last time, I was fortunate enough to listen to our friends from other countries, from Italy. They talk about our history, and I can see that from the literatures, we began to look into this aspect of our history together. Very inspiring, very inspiring. I believe that our research together will definitely bring us to a deeper understanding of a martial art together. And let's bring the martial art from the performance nature to combat and competition nature. So with more combats and competitions, we can be closer and closer to the nature of what it should be. Thank you very much for your time. And I shared very briefly my personal opinions, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you very much.